Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're here for a special Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We should point out up top, we have taped this earlier in the week, so we don't know what happened in the CNN interview with Dana Bash and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. I'm sure we wouldn't have been impressed, but who knows? We'll have more to say about that probably on Tuesday.
Greg,
just a couple of
I was going to say, we just have to guess. And so for me, the most shocking part was when Kamala Harris said, "This is a battle. We are at war with Trump." And Walz just ran out of the studio. That just shocked me. That I'm retiring, and just fled out of there. That's my guess at what happened. I don't know. Taped before the interview.
Very awkward. Yes. Instead of being at work today, the Corombos family is doing the most Corombos family thing ever and going to visit the Presidential Library of Calvin Coolidge this weekend. So
I want to watch a sitcom about the Coromboses.
My daughter's a huge Calvin Coolidge fan, so that's what we're doing on Labor Day weekend. And then on Monday, for Labor Day itself, Jim and I spoke recently with our good friend Tevi Troy of the Bipartisan Policy Center and author of the new book, The Power and the Money, but he's also a huge diehard fan, so that's going to get in there as well. So listen to that on Monday. But today, we're going to take a look at the state of the presidential race. So assuming Harris didn't drop out last night, we think we have a pretty good handle on where things stand. And so, Jim, in terms of the Trump campaign, let's start there. Obviously, things have changed a lot over the past month and a half, from surviving the shooting to a pretty well-run convention. Trump seemed to be riding high. Biden was flailing. And then a couple days later, Biden gets out of the race. And adjusting has been a little bit of a chore. But the job remains the same in terms of trying to win this election. And that is indicting initially Biden, now Harris, on the Biden-Harris record. Harris is trying to present herself as the candidate of change, and the media is trying to carry that water inexplicably. There's no way to make yourself the candidate of change when you're part of the administration. But Trump needs to be hammering the border, the inflation, so many other failures, foreign policy of this administration. And there seems to be a lot of situations where he's getting sidetracked either by the news cycle or by his own instincts. And part of his instincts is what endeared him to people 8 years ago. But if you're going to make the strongest case possible to defeat Kamala Harris, there's a horrible, horrible record you need to prosecute, and you need to be doing it all day, every day. Yeah, and it requires discipline. It requires an ability to focus. And the other thing, which I think, a lot of politicians have this flaw, probably the best one the one who did it best, who did not have this flaw, was Reagan. And I don't mean to, be our usual Reagan drum beating selves, but I feel like a lot of Republicans, there's like a 10-step argument and they begin on the 9th step. And there are a lot of examples of this, but Trump will take a very legitimate argument, right? I was framed and smeared as being a Russian agent for the better part of my first term. I was exonerated by Mueller. I was exonerated by every investigation. Just the fact that because I, say nice things about Putin does not mean that I am in cahoots with him or an agent. But that was a New York Magazine cover piece speculating that Trump had been a Putin agent going back to the 1980s. Right? They're just crazy. But what he'll do is he'll say, and, they do this stuff with the Russia. And he doesn't explain. Right? He just assumes when he says Russia, everybody knows what he means. And does his base know it? Yes. Do people in the media know it? Yes. Does the average American know it? I'm not so sure. And also, I don't know if, I understand why he feels aggrieved about it. I don't know if the average small business owner in Wisconsin is all that aggrieved about it. I think you got to focus. They've done focus groups. They've done polling. They know, the three biggest weaknesses of Kamala Harris are the border, immigration, the migration czar, she should not be able to escape the Biden administration's decisions on border and illegal immigration. Second one is on inflation, cost of living, and the economy. Now, it's interesting. I've heard Democrats pointing out and bragging that nobody blames her for the Biden administration economic policies, in part because no one knew what she did for the past, couple of years. And you can make a very strong argument that the Biden team did not want her front and center in all these policies. Nonetheless, you can and should tie her, that she has not specified, other than price controls,
something out of the Soviet Union. They have not done that. Right? And the third one is that she's a San Francisco liberal. And it's not enough to call her a San Francisco liberal. Go back into her policy, right? Taxpayer funding for abortion all the way up to the ninth month on everything from DEI to, because she wanted to have the Federal Reserve banks required to interview a minority candidate for every position. Just go down the list and say, is this what you want? And I wrote a Morning Jolt about this a couple of days ago, kind of like, because Thomas Sowell, right? If there's anybody who's right up there, like, here's John McClane, here's Ronald Reagan, and Thomas Sowell is slightly above those guys in terms of his, and Sowell had said, like, how are you losing this race? It's a little bit of that, John Lovitz's Mike Dukakis, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy. If you ask people on the issues, they prefer Trump's position over and over again. But then you go to which candidate do you prefer, and it's an even split between Harris and Trump. Right? So, like, you have the advantage on the issues. Focus on the issues. Don't focus on how good you think the Green Bay Packers are going to do. That's not Packer bashing. That's just pointing out that doesn't belong in your acceptance speech at the convention. That does, don't talk about, I didn't know she was black. Don't go on and on about crowd size and how your crowds are bigger than Martin Luther King. Focus. I said in my Washington Post column the other day that I want to see Trump, like, he had said Biden was on cocaine when he did the State of the Union address. Now, I think Quaaludes might have been more likely, but either way, I want to see Trump debate Harris on Ritalin. Just see if we could do something about that ADD right there. Just do something to get him to focus more. Look, the message is there, and if Trump is disciplined enough over the next 60-some days, he'll win. But if he isn't, I don't think he will. And I think what's infuriating is that there's nothing anybody outside of the campaign can do to overcome a candidate who will not focus on the messages that are most effective.
This is Trump's third nomination, obviously. So America is extraordinarily used to him. What slice of the electorate do you think that hasn't already made a decision on him is gettable, that may have voted for Biden last time but is disgusted with the Biden record? Do you think that's a decent chunk or not?
Well, if you look at the polling numbers right before Biden withdrew, pretty much from the debate to Biden's withdrawal, the good news is Trump was ahead. The bad news is he was not overwhelmingly ahead, but in most of these swing states, it started going from a neck and neck or a very slight Trump lead to 3 points, 4 points, 5 points. Maybe even you find a couple of 6 or 7s in a place like North Carolina. Most of the year, like early. So North Carolina, Biden didn't win 4 years ago, and I didn't think he was going to win this time around. I went down to Georgia earlier this year, and the Republicans there are like, we got this locked up. Biden, the last cycle was a fluke. Now Harris is polling very well in those two states. I think they're probably both jump balls right now. Really, almost like the result of the last couple of polls, the last couple of days, is every swing state looks very swingy. So you could see Trump sweep all of them. The blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, as well as what they're calling the Sun Belt states of Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. You could also see Trump losing all of these. And so I think we are really at a knife's edge right now. And probably what happens in this debate and the messaging in the closing weeks are probably going to be, what decides all this.
And so having a message and sticking to it would be very, very effective if the Republicans want to have a chance to win. All right, Jim, on to our second martini here and assessing where the Harris campaign is. And I guess she could have offered more specifics in the interview last night, so it could be a little bit corrected by that. But so far, since July 21st...
Hold on. We know she's not going to go into a lot of details tonight. That's a prediction I feel pretty good. And if she goes out and says that slides and charts and goes through and offers precise numbers, here's exactly how price controls are going to work, instead of... Dana, we're just going to help. We just don't want people to get gouged. And if she does that, I'll gladly eat humble pie.
By the way, last week at the convention, we talked about how Obama's tell that he didn't know what he was talking about, or he was trying to bamboozle you, is that he stutters before he comes up with his big line. With Harris, it's if she holds her hands up like she just caught an 8-inch fish and she's telling you about, reeling this thing in, and she nods a lot. That's your clue that she is spinning her wheels and she doesn't know where she's going with this. So buckle up for the ride. But anyway, in your Morning Jolt on Thursday, you talked about how so far Kamala Harris has reinvigorated the Democratic Party with a lot of help from the media, obviously, while basically running in some ways on nothing other than reversing her more radical position. So by allegedly running vaguely to the middle, this has somehow fired up her progressive base. In the end, she has seemingly motivated her base, and she's doing better than Biden was, I think, among independents in a number of areas, simply by staying as vague and smiley as possible. The question is, can this work in this sprint of 3.5 months?
So far, if it isn't working gangbusters, it appears to be working well enough to get it, as I said, in a roughly jump ball in a whole bunch of these swing states. It's worth noting that, because of the way the Electoral College works, Harris probably has to win the popular vote by like 3 or 4% to get to 270 electoral votes. If you're Trump, you're probably looking at this and saying, well, the good news is we've had a really lousy stretch since Biden dropped out, and we're still in this. So that's the upside. But yeah, I think one of the unnerving lessons of these past month or so has been that, we talked earlier in the week about Joe Biden effectively disappearing for long stretches. Mm-hmm. The Democratic Party doesn't need a leader. Or I know people are going to say, oh, it's Nancy Pelosi pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's Barack Obama pulling the strings behind the scenes. But I think also the lesson of this, and I don't know about you, I'm having flashbacks to 2008 and the Obama Messiah phenomenon, and the crowd chanting Obama, Obama, and Oprah singing that he is the one, like Neo in the Matrix. Democrats want that happy, cool celebrity vibe, and they don't really care if the candidate doesn't have an issues page. Now, some of this is negative polarization, in which you ask people, what do you want Harris to do? First and foremost, it's not that different from the argument in 2020. First and foremost, they wanted to stop Trump. Right, defeating the opposition is the single highest priority. And then the flip side, you ask people, why are you voting for Trump? There's a chunk of them people who just absolutely love him. But I think another big chunk is, well, we got to stop Harris and the Democrats. We got to stop them from, and everybody knows generally what a Democrat wants to do. A Democrat wants to grow the size of government. A Democrat is going to tell you they're not going to raise their taxes, or that they're only going to tax the rich. And then they're going to raise taxes every way they can and hope that you don't notice that actually, wait a second, these new fees, they weren't taxes, they were fees, they'll try to do that. They will push policy to the left as far as they can, pretty much across the board. They will talk about making America strong again, and then they will automatically say, how much, dear Iran, how much money do you want? They will say, I will be a proud supporter of Israel. And then every time, Israel bombs some terrorists, they're like, shouldn't have used the lighter bomb. That's kind of heavy. That's the bait and switch. And you mentioned the jolt the other day. I'm old enough to remember Bill Clinton running on a middle class tax cut in 1992. Yes. Getting into office and then saying, oh my God, the deficit's so bad. Sorry, I can't do it. In fact, we're going to do tax hikes. I said we're going to raise taxes on millionaires. And by that, I mean households making $250,000 a year or more. Well, you're not really a millionaire then, are you? Husband and wife making $125,000 a year. Look, you're not poor in that circumstance, but there are a whole bunch of places in this, even back then, $125,000 in $1992. In New York City, that didn't go that far. I don't know, DC, I wasn't there. I wasn't around DC back then. LA, like $125,000 in a bunch of parts of the country, 2-earner family. It's really like middle class to upper middle class. You're not a millionaire. And that's, of course, Biden. Boy, there's a Freudian slip. All these old Democrats start to look, this was the one who acted creepy around young women. Wait, that doesn't narrow it down. But anyway, so on the one hand, this is that. I also kind of feel like Democrats want to be fooled. I kind of, the sheer enthusiasm we've seen for Obama, the sheer enthusiasm we've seen for Harris, and the fact that the enthusiasm wasn't quite as high for Hillary Clinton and for Joe Biden. I think they like the celebrity approach. They don't bore me with the details of how you're actually going to govern. And you could argue that Donald Trump was the most effective parry the Republican Party could offer, because they nominated their own celebrity, a guy who had been hosting a reality show on NBC for a decade. But there's a part of me that's like, this is all a category error. You are hiring a temp worker to run the executive branch of the government and act as commander-in-chief of the military for a 4-year span with an option for another 4 years. And you're not electing a messiah. You're not electing somebody who's Tim Walz is not your daddy. Kamala is not your mamala, as Drew Barrymore insisted. Right. Trump is not your daddy, as Milo Yiannopoulos insisted. This is all the moment I hear somebody saying that kind of stuff, you're like, okay, you have serious psychological issues. please go get therapy and step out of the political commentary world, because this is not, every dictator has wanted to be seen as the father of their country. No, we're not kids. We are grown adults. I nearly used a bad word there. We are grown adults, and we don't need some political figure to act as our national patriarch telling us what we can and can't do. That
is so well said, because you see it on both sides of the aisle now, especially on social media, which obviously gets intense. But even if you see somebody who's an ardent supporter of a candidate criticize one thing that the candidate said or did, the pile-on from the people who will accept absolutely no deviation from pure devotion is insane.
Look, I'm really unsold on Kamala Harris. The only upside I could see is I could see her getting into the job and very much like we saw with Obama, the country realizing, oh, this is not the dish I ordered. This is not what I was expecting. Send it back, and having disastrous midterms. There's this pendulum effect where Americans get really excited about a Democratic presidential nominee, elect him. The policy is way further to the left than they expect, and and Republicans come roaring back in the midterms. I'd rather we didn't have to go through that in the first place, but I think at least there's that good sense that recurring pattern. But that is, it'd be nice if we could just kind of recognize that you're not there are certain people who I think are genuinely evil and deserve to be denounced, and that there is no moral nuance. Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, terrorists like the Houthis and Hamas and all that, and of course Adam Gase. But outside of those rare examples, we should probably recognize that our fellow Americans are, these are political differences, not our enemies. And we should have a little bit of room for criticizing the folks who are on our side. And, when they're fair and when they're justified and when they're well-founded, and acknowledging that people on the other side occasionally have, good redeeming features, but not Adam Gase.
Jim's got Adam Gase on the brain, so that means he needs some Z-Biotics just in case he thinks about those 2 seasons where Adam Gase was in charge and goes for an adult beverage, because Z-Biotics is the smart move. Anytime you're about to have an adult beverage, take Z-Biotics, and guaranteed you will feel better the next morning than you would have if you didn't take it.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. And if you just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, as you always should, and you will feel your best the following morning.
Yes, as I've said many times, my colleague knew his limits, felt great the next morning. As he got older, not so great the next morning. Tried Z-Biotics, felt perfect. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, a little bit of speculation here on our third martini on the state of the race, and this is potentially looking forward to future campaigns. Obviously, we had a unique set of circumstances this year where a sitting president of the United States had secured at least the delegates to become his party's nominee again, had a disastrous debate, which oddly occurred before the convention. You might wonder who might have been behind that decision, but nonetheless, then he gets shoved aside. So Kamala Harris, who wasn't running, hadn't gotten any votes, just like she didn't when she actually was running back in 2019, becomes the nominee almost by acclaim within the first 24 to 48 hours. Nobody else even bothers to compete for the nomination. And so even though she's got a terrible track record as a vice president and as a senator, the campaign, the DNC, and their allies in the media get to roll her out as this fresh face and even the candidate of change, which is completely absurd. One of the takeaways I'm getting here, Jim, especially since this certainly appears to be putting Harris in a more competitive situation than Biden was, is how the parties will look at this looking forward to future cycles. Do you still go with the people, who want to be president, want to be the nominee, starting their exploratory committees, announcing their candidacies just weeks after the midterms and going through this, year-long meat grinder just to get to the primaries and caucuses, and then a year and a half to get to convention season, at which point, depending on how many rivals you've got, you could be pretty bloodied by the time you face the nominee of the other party? Or do they somehow come up with a system that shortens the process, still gives the people, I guess, a say, unless you want to go back to the old school conventions, which I don't think the public would love a lot, but some way to present your candidates as fresh and new and exciting, as opposed to somebody that people might be tired of by the time they actually officially get the nomination.
Greg, I'm glad we're making this our third martini, because it gives me a chance to kind of like these half-formed thoughts that are all kind of congealing together, like Adam Gase. No. So we've ended up in an era of like 2-year presidential campaigns. In fact, Trump actually announced he was running like a week after the midterms in 2022. Yeah. That was absurdly early, but you could argue it was clear Trump was going to run for re-election by January 6th. I don't know. Like, it was kind of clear that basically Trump had absolutely no intention of retiring quietly. 2-year presidential campaigns are expensive. 2-year presidential campaigns mean that by the time the election rolls around, almost everybody's like, just get it over with already. And the other great irony heading into this cycle was you had, not just two old men running, not just a president versus a former president. Look, not only is Donald, first of all, Liz Mayer, a Republican consultant, did studying and came to the conclusion that when Trump began to run, he came down the escalator in summer of 2015, he had a 99 name recognition. Everybody already knew, right? Bobby Jindal didn't have that. Scott Walker didn't have that. Like a whole bunch of people who wanted to run that cycle were not nearly as well known. Also, I believe Hillary Clinton had a 99, 100% name recognition or something. Lo and behold, they won the nominations. So the first thing is like, you have to be much better known. It's very tough to beat someone who is extremely well known. Second thing is, so Joe Biden, so you have Trump who had been, I think about like how much the political discussion has focused around Donald Trump almost every day since the summer of 2015, right? Maybe there was a stretch in 2021 where he faded into the background a little bit. I can't help but have a suspicion that might be why Glenn Youngkin had managed to pull off the win in the Virginia gubernatorial race. But Trump has been front and center almost every day for the better part of a decade. And look, even Obama comes and goes within about an 8-9 year span. Two-term presidents only serve 8 years. They serve 8 years and then they go away. And that has not been the case with Trump. And as a result, if he wins, he will be front and center in American life for 12 years. Even if he loses, there's no guarantee that he will then retire quietly. So we're talking about someone who's just been around for a long time. And to the extent Trump is having trouble, is there, how many people are just tired of him? How many people have just heard his voice? How many people have heard me do this and say, oh God, Jim's doing the Trump impression again? It's just a really familiar voice. I think this also explains the level of excitement and interest in J.D. Vance. And for that matter, Tim Walz, that just, we have somebody new to think about. We have new records to examine. We have new votes to new, policies to, pass comments to dissect and stuff. Harris should not have this advantage. But I think one of the lessons of her reinvention was that her 2019 crash and burn campaign was a big deal in Democratic circles. I don't know if the general electorate paid as much attention. I knew she was there, but maybe a little bit of that little girl was me, but I think that she was kind of this afterthought. She gets selected as Joe Biden's running mate. But the other great thing is she had a very low approval rating. It was in the 30s. Over on the 538 is a good way of tracking the job approval rating. Then she becomes the nominee and it just jumps right up. And it's all Democrats. That's all Democrats who had, been kind of meh on her. And now she's the nominee. Mandatory joy, Greg. You must feel good about her. And basically they all fell in line. But also to a certain extent, does Kamala Harris feel better being front and center and able to sell herself and not worrying, does this contradict what Joe Biden wants? But yeah, so I think there's a great yearning to have shorter campaign seasons. Unfortunately, there will still be people who say, I should look at them, the old joke, 100 U.S. senators look in the mirror and see a U.S. president, staring back at them, humming Hail to the Chief as they get dressed in the morning. And they decide to, run, even though their name ID nationally is 20% or something like that. And what they do is they convince themselves is that I'm going to shake enough hands at enough diners in Iowa, and I'm going to do enough town halls in New Hampshire, and I'm going to become the next president of the United States. And then they do something like Dean Phillips where they throw a town hall and no one shows up. That there's something a little unfair about this, but to be a serious presidential candidate, people have to have heard of you.
And I would go further and say, if you want to be president of the United States, ideally you've done something. And when you say, I led the fight on X, I really want your led the fight to have been more than just, I voted for a bill. Or even I co-sponsored a bill, right? I want you to say, oh, wow, remember that guy? Yeah, he's the one who made X happen. And if you can't have a good answer to that question, you turn into Bobby Rush destroying Barack Obama in the one race Obama ever lost, where, Obama is this part-time constitutional law lecturer. He was never a professor. And he's going out and talking about stuff. And Rush is just like, what's he done? I mean, really, what's he done? And apparently the audience laughs. And there's just kind of like just the one time Obama got crushed. He didn't have the resume. He didn't have the accomplishments that made people take him seriously. I think there are a whole bunch of people who run for president because they want to be a celebrity. They want a TV gig. They want to be more famous. They know they have no chance of winning. And as a result, they end up as being, this is going to sound harsh, globs of human cholesterol clogging the arteries of our primary system. I could be talking about anybody, Greg, Jim Gilmore.
And they could push this further into the election year. And so, you get closer to the convention.
There's no need for a debate more than 6 months, really 4 months before the Iowa caucuses.
At the most. Yeah, you could really be doing it towards the end of the year. So anyway, we will find out what the strategies are going forward and what the impact of the whole Democratic switcheroo is on future campaigns in due time. Jim, have a good Labor Day weekend. Talk to you next week.
See you next week, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Join us on Monday for that special edition of the 3 Martini Lunch and then our regular fare on Tuesday.